to introduce you to our next speaker, who is currently the Senior Manager of Community Relations for Premera Blue Cross. He has provided leadership and direction for the company's corporate and social responsibility programs. His passion for his work stems from experience as a parent, a former student of Seattle Public Schools, and he is deeply committed to the success and social equity of young people and marginalized communities. Please help me welcome Solynn McCurdy to our stage.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is wonderful to see all of you on a bright Friday morning, and I say it is an honor to follow such a prestigious mayor, Miss Mayor Smith. Thank you for this honor. Thank you, Kathy, and your team from Leadership Snohomish County. Premera is very proud to be a supporter of this event, and I'll just say personally, I feel quite privileged as someone who is a young black man who's grown up just south of here in King County in the Central District area, to be before you talking about such a critical issue to my community and to our community. I feel privileged as a father of two beautiful African-American children, one of them being an 18-year-old young man who's now taller than me. Can you believe it? He's still skinnier than me, but he's taller than me. Got a little bass in his voice now, too. But again, just in a time where our young black boys are being targeted in many communities, this conversation is critical and central to the work that I believe in. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity. As the largest health plan in the Northwest, Premera is committed to this idea of improving customers' lives by making healthcare work better. And we have done many things in the past couple of years, serving over 2 million customers, individuals, families, employer groups. But as we continue this work and really have started to refine our purpose, I think we have gotten even more clear and honest with ourselves that there are many inherent and pervasive disparities that exist in our communities, many of which you are very familiar with. And so we are starting to do things like really think about, through our corporate social responsibility, how we can increase our giving, how we can increase our philanthropy, how we can increase our volunteerism and our reach in some of our most underserved communities. Excuse me, we're really striving to do more in terms of our customers and our communities and meeting them where they are, being responsive to their needs, to understand the complexities of healthcare, and really putting them at the center of all that we do in our work every single day. We want to make healthcare simple and easy because, it's really complicated. It's funny. It's so complicated, more complicated than education. I never thought it would be. But we want to make sure that people get the kind of care that they really want and they really need. And even in some of the practices that we're trying to deal with around mental and behavioral health, we want to promote approaches and preventions that really think about resilience and think about trauma-informed care and practice, so that as we work with communities, as we work with individuals, we can foster healing, we can foster connection and social fabrics for our communities. And I want to be honest that when we think about this idea of improving health equity, it's not just about treatment. It's not just about giving somebody a pill or some type of intervention. It really is about ensuring the attainment for the highest quality of health for every individual in this community. So for Premera, we're going to pay attention to the root cause. We're going to do all that we can to think about the health inequities and health disparities that exist amongst populations. We're going to pay a particular attention to the groups that have experienced major obstacles, with health that are associated with our socioeconomic disadvantages and associated with those who historically and contemporarily have experienced injustice. We're going to make sure, and I'm going to make sure, that through our investments, through our volunteerism, through our time, that we're intentional about getting our resources to the individuals in our communities that really need it the most. And I hope that through our partnership. I hope that through our collaboration, we can hold each other accountable, we can have a shared responsibility in this work, and we can look forward to creating some great work together. So with that, enough about me, enough about Premera. I am very honored to introduce someone who I hold to a very, I just think so wonderfully about, Dr., the incomparable Dr. Caprice Hollins. Give it up for her, please. Because I'm just a small disciple standing up here trying to introduce her. She's really famous. So I met Caprice about 10 years ago. At that time, she was working for Seattle Public Schools doing their equity and inclusion work. And I remember I was a program director doing college access programs in a local high school, and just sat mesmerized by her words, by her poise, by her ability to just go in on people and just dig and pull the very best out of them in some of these critical conversations around race. And I don't know if she was like stalking me or I was stalking her, but we kept running in the same circles and we would see each other in the most random places. And she even somehow found me at my local church. I don't know when you started going to New Beginnings. But it was so funny that about a year ago, I ran into her husband, Gary, and I was thinking about trying to incorporate a diversity and inclusion training at Premera, and lo and behold, Gary said, well, you need to know my wife, Caprice, because she's the best out there that we got to offer. And I just happened to know her. So I'm glad Gary was stalking me too. So with that, let me introduce Caprice. Dr. Hollins has more than 20 years of experience working with ethnically diverse populations, providing mental health services and teaching graduate courses. She currently is an affiliate professor at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Dr. Hollins, or Caprice, holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology from Seattle University. Go Redhawks. She also has both a master's and a doctoral degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis in multicultural and community psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology, Los Angeles. She has served as Director of Equity, Race, and Learning Support for Seattle Public Schools, and then co-founded Cultures Connecting LLC. Her keynote today will be Understanding Our Implicit Bias. Who, me? Yes, you. Taking a colorblind approach to race, let me start over. Taking a colorblind approach to race doesn't change the fact that in the 21st century, race still matters. While statements like, we are all human, and I don't notice race, usually comes from a good place and it's well-intentioned, research shows that we actually do see racial difference, and that professing to not notice is more likely to cause the very harm these well-intentioned statements said by well-meaning people are trying to avoid. In her keynote, Dr. Hollins will discuss the research on implicit bias and propose alternative ways of thinking about this critical subject. Please, everyone, join me, stand up, cheer for our most wonderful Dr. Caprice Hollins.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Now, as good looking as this guy is, you know why I was stalking him, right? Thank you. Not just for inviting me here, but your willingness to be a part of these conversations. I believe that the work of the 21st century is to figure out how we talk about this. That if we don't figure out how to talk about it, then we can't get to the solutions. I started asking this question maybe about 8 months ago in doing workshops. I would first ask my audience, when you were growing up, what were the messages that you received about talking about race? And these themes would come out. Now, before I tell you the themes, I need you to turn to your neighbor and say, she doesn't mean all. Meaning, as I'm up here speaking to you today, I never mean all Latinos, all natives, all blacks, all whites, all Asians. So would you do me that favor so that I don't ever have to put this disclaimer out there again, that she never means all? Turn to your neighbor. She never means all. When I ask people, when they were growing up, what were they taught about talking about race? Whites tend to say that it wasn't until they left that small town, until much later in their adult life, maybe they attended that college, they took that job where having conversations about race was a mandatory opportunity. My point is, it wasn't until much later in life that most whites began to even explore what does it mean to be white. But people of color, they say something different. They'll say, I don't remember a time when it didn't matter. I don't remember a time when it wasn't a part of the conversation. And usually there's two different responses or themes that I hear from people of color. One is that people of color will tell stories or share experiences or things that their family said to them to teach them to assimilate into dominant culture. In other words, their parents will prepare them to make white people feel comfortable being around them. Can I say that here? That don't speak your language. I mean, we know that phenotypically the way that you look can't be hidden, but how you show up. Hide as much as you can about who you are culturally so that white people feel comfortable being around you. And the other theme that I hear is at the moment that you walk out the door, that parents are teaching their children, the moment you walk out that door, people are going to do something with the color of your skin, and I need to prepare you how to navigate that. That's my conversation with my 16-year-old son who's 6'4", wears size 16 wide shoes. My immigrant brothers and sisters of color, and by the way, when I say immigrant, I think of most of us as immigrants in this country, with the exception of our Native American brothers and sisters, with the exception of our African American brothers and sisters. And of course, we know that we crossed the borders of Mexico and took over that land. And so when I think about this country, and I think about immigration, and I think about how short our memory is as a country, that essentially we are a country of immigrants with the exception of the groups that I just named. So when I say more recent immigrants of color, when I ask them that question, what they'll say is, I didn't even know I was a person of color until I got here, which speaks to how racialized our nation is. And so I asked that question, and I've paid attention to those themes because it makes sense to me that we don't know how to have these conversations. Right? Research shows that white parents of white children, white parents of children of color are teaching their children to be colorblind. That their thought is that this is how I will teach my children to be different from people who are overtly racist. So if I've known that my whole life that my race matters, and I'm engaging a white person who is just now coming into this conversation, we're going to be in very different places. One of the reasons that professional development is so important, which I love the different topics that you have offered to you today, but one of the reasons that professional development is so important is because this is really about learning. This is really about understanding. And if we don't understand something, the best thing that we can do is try to learn about it. So we've got to get better at, as a nation, figuring out how do we meet each other where we're at? How do we get curious about one another's experiences? My mom is white. Let me just really quickly tell you a little bit about myself. My mom is white, grew up Catholic, married at a time when women's roles were to stay at home and take care of the children. She had my 4 older brothers and sisters, Mark, Mike, Ted, and Kelly. They're blonde hair, blue eyes. She divorced, she got pregnant with me. I'm born in 1965 at a time where in this country interracial marriages were still illegal in some states. My mom did not talk with me about race. It wasn't until I got into graduate school that I had any formal conversations. I met my dad when I was in 4th grade. He did not help to raise me. I didn't know my mom's side of the family. I didn't know my dad's side of the family. My grandparents, a black couple who didn't have children of their own, adopted my mom at the age of 41, legally adopted her. So when I went into graduate school, minoring in multicultural and community psychology, they believed that if, as a clinician, we operated under colorblind thinking, we would be more likely to do harm than good. In other words, if I ignored the identities that my clients brought into the space, that I would not be able to help them. They believed that our identities shaped our perception of things because of the experiences that we had in the world, and that our perceptions then created the realities that we held. And so they taught us how to talk about not just race, but class and gender and sexual orientation and all of these areas in which we categorize people, where we've had policies and practices put in place so that we could create this unlevel playing field so that some people would be at an advantage and others at a disadvantage. And when I entered into graduate school, I believed that I didn't have biases or stereotypes. In other words, I saw myself as someone who didn't need to do the work that I thought that other people needed to do, because I could always point to someone in my family as proof of my truth that I don't do that thing that those people over there do. And one of the things that my graduate school experience taught me was yes, me too. My relationships with my brothers as white men, I thought that that would translate to my relationship with other white men. And what I came to understand is I make them different from you. They're not like you, while I hold on to the stereotypes and biases that I have about white men. I'm essentially making the point to all of you, if you haven't figured this out, is that I've come to realize that I've judged every one of you in this room. And I don't even have to meet you to judge you. I'm coming out to Linwood, Snohomish County. I've got some thoughts and ideas about who I think you are. And I always tell people, you shouldn't worry that I'm judging you. You should worry if I don't know that I'm judging you. Because when I don't know that I have assumptions and preconceived notions about who I think you are, then I can't be intentional about not letting those assumptions get in the way of how I treat you. Now, I was a very shy person. I was a very introverted person growing up and through my early young adult life. And the idea that I would ever stand on a stage and tell a room full of people that I judged them would have me shaking in my boots. But since I'm telling you this, the only way, let me say it this way, the only way that I would ever tell you that is because I also know that you're judging me. And I want you to know that I don't worry that you're judging me. I only worry if you don't know that you're judging me. Because then you can't be intentional, right, about how you show up in this space that we're sharing together. Now, I not only have diversity as it relates to race and adoption, I also have a brother that's gay. I always knew my brother was gay. Let me say it this way. I didn't know what gay was as a child, but I did know that this brother was different from other boys. And so when I pretty much grew up with the gay community, as a part of my community, my mom was very open and embracing of his sexual orientation. It wasn't just around race that I struggled to look at where I held biases, because I always thought that it meant that I was saying something bad about my family. The hardest people for me to engage in these conversations is not the person who is overtly racist. I already know what to do with that. It's the good, kind, loving, moral, ethical person, the person who can say, I work with someone who is, my best friend is, I have children who are. It's those good, kind, loving, moral, ethical people who think that their relationship with that individual then translates to their relationship with a group of people. They're the hardest. Here we are getting a little bit older. I also have a brother that's a Republican. Sometimes people laugh. Sometimes not. Then I wonder if the room is full of Republicans. But whether you're Republican or Democrat or whatever your political view is, I'm really not saying it to be funny, in all honesty. I'm really sharing it with you to say that all the diversity in my life made me more resistant to the conversation that Kathy and others are inviting you into today. And I invite you to not look at what other people are doing to develop their cultural competence, but what are you doing? That you ask the question, what am I doing? How am I showing up in these conversations? How do I help move the race conversation forward? I'm going to share with you my Where I'm From poem, just so that you know a little bit more about where I'm coming from, but also a big part of this work is self-work. It's not always about they, those, them out there. It's also about you in here. I loved that poem, Breathe. Sometimes I need to breathe. I am from an Irish and Scottish world. Translated, white, who never fully accepted me, but never quite rejected me, like the way they did my dark-skinned sisters. I am from African queens who took pride in the gaps between their teeth until years of enslavement divided us with, you think you're better than me, don't you? That's where I'm from. I'm from a laid-back pool-playing absent father with children I've never met, and your daddy loves you, honey. He's a good man. I'm from a pimp for a stepdad, Lester Lee Wingate III. But there were still fun times in Ketchikan and Valdez, and hey, we got a new baby sister now. That's where I'm from. I'm from a mother who made us a family when her own turned the other way, who loved me with all her being, who believed that I was beautiful, whose eyes would beam with pride at every step I would take, who would take away all my pain if she could. You have the world to fight, don't fight one another, shotgun in her hand if anyone was to ever try to hurt one of her babies, and don't judge one another kind of mother. That's where I'm from. I'm from Marion and George's Barbecue and Catering on 23rd and Judkins. Grandparents who found the blessing of being grandparents in me. Piled high on their bed, watching old black and white, seeing whites dressed as Chinese and Indians, playing penny ante poker, homemade potato chips, costumes, jams and jellies, and a kitchen that always smelled oh so good. Everything from scratch except for the closet full of toilet paper and paper towels, because you just never know. And how come you don't have more black friends, honey? That's where I'm from. I'm from Myrtle Creek, Oregon. White grandparents who were ashamed of the color of my skin, hearing taunts of nigger go home, where teachers pretended they didn't hear, and a white grandmother who believed if she told me to just ignore it, that I actually could. Can't wait to go home because names do hurt me. I'm from gumbo, oxtail stew, collard greens, Mahalia Jackson on cleanup Sundays, Michael Jackson's Enjoy Yourself, step into the groove, and doing the bump if you can. I'm from summer trips to the Oregon coast to visit Father Timmy and Uncle Billy and, Mommy, who's Jim Crow? Whistle while you work. Nixon is you kids, knock that off. I'm from Coopville, Washington, loving summer life on the farm until, what's that you're putting in your hair? And you must be good at basketball. I don't need to ask you why you won't ask me to dance. I already know because you nicknamed me Shadow and played games called nigger knocking and then said you were sorry that you wanted to invite me to your sleepover, but couldn't. I'm from a family who loves me. But a world that still judges me because of the color of my skin. Where are you from? Thank you. Sometimes people say, don't take it personal. But it's so hard not to when it is. And my mom had just recently passed away, and so giving of myself in this way is a little harder than I'm used to. Usually, I've said that poem millions of times, and it has just been something that I do, but it's hitting me in a deep way lately, so just give me grace around that, will you? Bringing ourselves into this space is a part of the work, rather than holding it in and pretending like what it means to be professional is to not be personal. Sometimes when you try to talk about race and racism and race relations with people, they want to take what is thought of as a universal approach to these conversations. This idea that we're all human. They might say things like, we all bleed. Why do we have to talk about differences? Differences just divide us. Now, I want you to know that I do think that we're all human. I know that we're all human. I don't think that we're always treating people like they're human. I'm reminded of that and what happened in United Way with the Asian doctor who was dragged off of the plane. So I don't want us to lose sight of this. And the fact that we think that talking about racism is going to divide us, I actually believe that we're already divided. And I'm wondering why you don't know that. Why don't you realize that it's not talking about race that's dividing us? It's not talking about it that is creating the division. So let's not lose sight of this, but this isn't what the conversations are about. Then I come across those folks who will say, I don't notice the color of your skin. They might say, I don't care if you're black, purple, blue, or green. I hate all people equally. If you try to hold them accountable for that thing that they did or said that you believe might have something to do with the color of your skin. These are folks that want to take the individual approach. And one of the questions that I have about myself that I ask in those moments that I wonder about, because see, I understand what their intentions are. I think it comes from a good place. I think they want to let me know that they're not going to judge me. I think they want me to know that they're going to treat me fairly. I think they want me to know that they're a good person, or maybe even they want me to know that they're not like those people over there. And I wonder to myself, why can't I be black and you not judge me? Why can't I be black and you treat me fairly? In other words, why do you have to not see my race in order for you to do those good things? Can't both be true? The conversations around race are really about the group experience. And I always let people know this is hardest for my white brothers and sisters, because the group approach is about the collective experience. It's not about the individual experience. You can find any individual from a group who will think differently from the collective. This is where we get curious about what is it like to be Asian in this country? What is it like to be here for 3, 4 generations or more and have people still say to our Latino brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, you speak such good English. Someone that I met once said, when they say that to her, she says, thank you, you do too. What's it like to be a recent European immigrant and be 1 generation away simply because of the color of your skin to be seen as American? To be Asian, to be Latino, and no matter how many generations you've been here, people still don't associate your group as being American, and then come into this country recently and just be a generation away. The reason that I think that the conversation is the hardest for my white brothers and sisters is because when we're talking about the collective approach, we're also talking about our collective experience of whiteness. How are we treated in this country by people who are white? How do people benefit because of their whiteness? And what happens in that collective conversation is that whites will often go to the individual. They'll say things like, I'm not like that. Why are you trying to make me feel guilty? See, this is why I don't want to have these conversations, because you're trying to make me feel bad for being white. And what I want you to know is that this isn't necessarily about who you are as an individual. This is about our collective experience of whiteness. And if you want to be a part of these conversations, if you want to help us move the race conversation forward, then you got to stop having the Me Too narrative. I was poor growing up and I made it. Why are you complaining? I worked hard. I'm not complaining. This is very hard for my white brothers and sisters to not make the conversation about them and to sit in the tension and get curious about the experiences of people who don't look like them. I think it's normal to feel shame and guilt when you realize that people who look like you, maybe even you yourself, have done things that have caused harm. But the moment that I find that you can't hold the conversation, that you can't have the conversation, what ends up happening is that I end up taking care of you. Oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. I'm sorry if I offended you. Because I might be the only person of color or one of few in my workplace, and I don't want to have to go to work each day having you feel uncomfortable being around me, so I work really hard making you feel safe. See, people of color are contributing to the safety in these conversations as well. It's not just white people. The moment we feel the discomfort, then we move away from it rather than lean into it. And I'm not talking about stomping on white people's heads. I'm talking about when white people start to get a little uncomfortable. Do we lean in? Or are there things that we say and do that move us away from it? And then we go home, we go to the margins, we go to that white ally, we go to that person of color that we can talk to, and then we say to them, you won't believe what this white woman said to me today. And the conversation happens over there. We've got to figure out how to have the conversation with each other. There's a lot of research on bias. That's what I'm here to talk with you about. There's a lot of research on it. I want to share with you some, but there's more and more coming out as the years go on. This was a study that was done in a law firm. They surveyed a group of partners, and they told the partners that the writing sample that they were being asked to look at, that they were either told that the writing sample was written by a white man, Thomas Meyer, or an African-American man, Thomas Meyer. Now, you've seen these studies before where the documentation, the resume, whatever it is the person is being asked to look at is the exact same. The only thing that is different is what is the perceived race of the person. And when these law firm partners thought that Thomas Meyer was white, they weren't as harsh or as critical of him. In fact, their tone was a little bit more hopeful. You know, Thomas Meyer, you know, he's generally a good writer. He needs a little work, but not too bad. But when they thought he was black, then he needs lots of work. You know, this guy has potential when he's white. When he's black, I can't even believe how he got into that college. We know that there are studies that show that even just your name creates bias. Even just hearing the name of someone will elicit assumptions about us. If your name is Aisha, you're going to get far few callbacks when you're applying for a job versus if your name is, for example, Allison. There's something that people of color have been doing because they know that you will have biases towards their name. So they do what is referred to as resume whitening. It's like, well, let me take care of this bias for you. Let me use my middle name, right? Our Asian brothers and sisters know that if they have an Asian sounding name and they're not applying for a job that's in the field of technology where we have those stereotypes, that they're gonna have a much harder chance of getting that job because we hold bias about what we think they're good at and what we think they're not good at. We know that if your name is Shamika, that some people will just put your resume aside without even looking at the content or the skills that you bring. And by the way, when I'm talking about bias, I want you to know that we have biases towards our own groups as well. I just went to a party with my husband a few months ago, and it was in a mansion. I'm like, oh, well, we got to go to this. I don't get to go to a mansion very often. And the friend that had invited myself and my husband is an artist, and it was going to be an opportunity to show his work. And it was primarily almost all African Americans in this party. There were probably maybe 6 whites. I saw 1 Asian, and the whole time my husband and I were whispering, I wonder whose mansion this is. This is a nice mansion. My husband's like, I think it might be that white guy's over there. And I'm like, I think it's that Asian guy's right there. I'm telling you, 1 Asian guy, 5 white people. The house is full of blacks, and my mind is saying, is it the white guys or the Asian guys? My husband has the opportunity to talk to him. The friend gives my husband a call and says, did you enjoy, just, follow up, did you enjoy it, how was it, whatever, glad you were able to come. And my husband and I are still curious, we never found the answer to it. And so he goes, hey, by the way, real casual, right? Like, by the way, whose home was that? And it turns out it was the black guys, right? One of the ways that we can know that we have biases, that we have stereotypes, is pay attention to those moments where you find yourself surprised. Hopefully you don't give that away. Hopefully you don't show the surprise in the moment when you ask to speak to the person in charge, but just pay attention. There are lots of studies on this. There are studies that show even when it comes to health care, that we will give better treatment. We will pay more attention to the headache, to the symptoms of white people than we will to people of color. We know that, I saw a study that talked about how even when it comes to the homeless, if you are white and homeless, you are more likely to have people give you some type of support than if you are a person of color. There's a study done looking at women in orchestras, women violinists. And apparently, I'm not really familiar with this field very much, but apparently there are far more men violinists and men being accepted into orchestras than women. So they wanted to take a look at what was happening in the interviewing process. So they decided to have the applicants audition behind a screen. And so they didn't see any change or very little change in the study. And so they were trying to figure out, now we know that it can't be that women aren't phenomenal violinists. So they paid attention to what were they not doing right in this study, and they realized that the people interviewing could hear this click, click, click as people were going behind the screen. And so the high heel shoes of the women were giving away the bias. So these aren't people, we're not sitting behind, getting ready to interview people or what have you, saying, oh, let me see how I can keep women out. Let me see how I can keep people. This is all unconscious, is what I'm telling you. So they had people take off their shoes, and sure enough, they saw the differences, and women started being more accepted. Let me get you to do something for a moment. Let's have a little fun. I've been kind of heavy with all my tears and emotion, and which, I'm not apologizing for it, and I'm not saying that I think it's not okay, but let me just switch us up a little bit. Can we do that? How many in the room know how to speak Greek or can read Greek or have some familiarity with Greek? Let me see. Okay. So for you, this is going to be a little bit harder. I'm going to show you some colors, and I want you to say the name of that. I want you to say the name of that color. What color is that? Red. Okay. So what you're going to do is I'm going to click really fast, and I want you to say that color as fast as you can. Are you ready? Yes. All right. Let's do it. So red. Blue, green, black, green, blue, red, black, red. Okay, so you're probably wondering what's my point. Let's do this again. This time, we're going to do it in English. What is that? Okay, so you ready? Let's do this again. I'm going to go, this time, go a little faster. I know it's morning, but did you have some coffee? Okay, so wake up. Let's go faster. Do it as loud as you can. All right, you ready?
Ready.
Oh, that is so weak. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right, let's do it. What happened? You did so well. I was going to give you all an A at first, but you failed the second half of the test. Let me tell you what happened. Your brain has had a lifetime of seeing the word red and the color red together. So much so that if you see red, you think the word red. If you see the word red, you think the color red. In other words, it's like glued together. And when I asked you to go fast, you didn't slow down. You didn't stop to really think that that word is black, but the color is red. Your brain got confused. This is the same thing that happens with racial stereotyping. You've had a lifetime of getting messages that blacks are dangerous, that Asians are good at math, that Latinos are lazy, that natives are one with nature, or whatever that message is. And you've been socialized to think about people in the way in which you think about them. So if you don't slow down, if you don't challenge those messages, if you don't stop yourself to say, who is this in front of me? Where am I stereotyping? You're going to continue to make these automatic assumptions that are going to affect people physically, emotionally, psychologically, in just about every aspect of our system, whether it's education, whether it's in the judicial system, whether it's in healthcare. We are seeing the impact of bias. And it's not they, those, them out there bias, it's your bias. Let me talk with you a little bit about so there's two books that I love that speak to this. One is Blind Spot. Blind Spot is written by Banaji and Greenwald, and they essentially make the case. They're not the only researchers that make the case for this, but make the case that none of us are exempt from having bias. And that it is more likely that if you aren't aware that you have it, that you are going to do harm. And it has nothing to do with what you think consciously. So consciously, I can think, I treat people equally, or I could have these values around treating people fairly. It's what's in my unconscious that's likely to be what's playing out. Whistling Vivaldi, Claude Steele makes the case that it's not just whether or not we have bias, but what are we going to do with that bias? In other words, why is that problematic for us to have bias about people because of the identities they hold? One of the things that I read in Vivaldi, in Steele's book, that I found very fascinating was this idea of stereotype threat. And stereotype threat is where that person who is being stereotyped is in a situation where they're worried that they're going to be seen in that way. They're more likely to show up in ways that perpetuate the stereotype. So for example, for myself, African Americans are stereotyped as being unintelligent. And I can be with a group of people sitting around a table planning something, and I could be the only person with a doctorate degree amongst that group. And if they are white men, who are in positions of power, I will find myself anxious and nervous. I will find myself trying to prove to them that I'm not that stereotype. And while I'm working hard to prove to them that that's not who I am, and it doesn't matter if that's what they're actually thinking, I think that you think that, I'm not able to just concentrate and focus on the thing that I'm set to there to do. I'm doing two things. I'm worrying and trying to plan with you. And doing the two things actually cause us to underperform. So sometimes we will see people underperforming and we'll think, well, there's the proof that they're not the qualified person for the job, or that they're not very smart in the school setting, and what we're not recognizing is I'm not bringing you my best. Because these images and messages are put out about me, and I'm worried that you'll think that of me. One of the things I love that Claude Steele talks about is this idea of being one mistake away from you thinking that of me. Whereas people of color are guilty until we prove ourselves innocent of that stereotype. White people have the freedom to be innocent of the stereotype until they prove themselves guilty. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on our babies, on our children, on our co-workers to walk around and have that mental labor playing out in their mind, and you don't even have to be conscious that that is what is going on for you. Now, all stereotypes, the stereotypes don't affect everyone in a negative way. There's something called the glass escalator. So I'll work in organizations that are female-predominated fields, and there'll be a few men. This happens a lot in education. And men might say, but I'm the minority. I'm the one that has it bad here. And this is actually not the case. When men are in a female-dominated field, they're actually at an advantage. The glass escalator is where you are, because of the stereotypes about you, you end up, excelling in that environment. The best example I can give to you is my husband he's over 6'5", dark-skinned African-American man, played sports his entire life, track and field, basketball. I go to graduate school in California. He comes with me. He needs a job. He's always been in sales, but he needs a job. It's around the holidays, and in the malls, they're hiring for the people to spray you with perfume while you walk by. Do you know that job? I'm allergic to perfume, so I wasn't too excited about it initially until I learned about all the other free products I would get, but that's not the point of the story. He takes this temporary job that's just happening during these Christmas holidays, and he very quickly gets a job at Estee Lauder. Loved it. Again, side note. Within 6 months, they make him the counter manager. Now, let me tell you that my husband knows nothing about makeup. When they hire him, they send you through to a 1-week training and to learn about the products and the application, but they hired him before the training would happen. The training wasn't gonna happen for 6 weeks. I am sitting down with my husband, I kid you not, saying, "This is mascara. And this is how you apply it." Within 6 months, he's the counter manager. They create this big poster, this advertisement, this flyer that says, "Come and have your makeup put on by makeup artist Gary Hollins." Excuse me? Within a year, he is a manager. Within 2 years, he is the account executive for all the Estee Lauders in Washington State. That is the glass escalator. Now, my husband is a phenomenal salesman, don't get me wrong, but my point is that you can't tell me that there wasn't a woman, at least one, that had the skills and qualifications to be manager. We know that with stereotypes that we all have them. We know that they're overgeneralizations. We're overgeneralizing people. We're locking them in a box. We're saying, if you hold this identity, this must be true of you. We know that we can have them about any group, even our own. And we know that stereotypes can be positive or negative. Now, we've got to be careful with this idea of positive, right? Like when some people will say, well, it's a positive thing to be an Asian and to be seen as good at math. Well, that's problematic for a couple of reasons. One is it proposes that if you're Asian, you have some math genes so that you're automatically good at math, and it negates the hard work that an Asian person might do to be good at math. It also ignores how class might play a role in someone being good at math. It also ignores the fact that all Asians are not good at math. What would it be like to be an Asian who is assumed to be good at math and then not be good at math? One of the stereotypes about my group, African Americans, is that we're good at dancing. And I want you to know I'm a wonderful dancer. I'm probably better than anyone in this room. So you might perceive that as a positive stereotype, but I want you to think a little bit deeper about that. Like, I know that I have never been in a job interview where someone says it's between you and this other final candidate. But we have one more qualification that we want to make sure. You know where I'm going with this? No one's ever broken out with a boom box. In other words, I want you to think about where there is a stereotype that seems like it's positive. How does someone benefit from that? I don't benefit in any way from being a good dancer other than when I'm out on the dance floor dancing. In fact, if you're really carefree or whatever, it doesn't matter if you're a good dancer or not, just as long as you're having a good time. So I don't really benefit from that. We are resistant to disconfirming evidence. In other words, all the engineers, scientists, doctors, lawyers, you name it, that you meet of a particular group are not going to change the way you see that group. Because you'll tell that person, I don't think of you as if you're Native. I don't think of you as Latino. I don't think of you as Black. In other words, what our brains do is we hold on to the stereotype about the group, and everyone else who doesn't fit that stereotype becomes different. That's what our brains do. The moment that someone confirms that stereotype, we're like, aha. I knew it. I always tell people when I think Latinos as well, I certainly know my black brothers and sisters, many of them do this, we're watching the news and a crime has been reported, yet they haven't said what the race of that person is. I think my black brothers and sisters, my brown brothers and sisters are sitting in front of that TV saying, oh Lord, please, please, please. And I know I'm assuming a belief in God in that, but I just want you to know it runs deep, right? Like, please don't let it be. Because we know that the moment someone from our group fulfills that assumption or that stereotype that we are dangerous, that's all it takes for people to say, see, I knew it. So we pay selective attention to those who fit that stereotype. And this is affecting people emotionally, psychologically, physically. There's a great video you should watch. It's not a YouTube, you'd have to purchase it, but it's called Unnatural Causes. And it has some great research around how it is affecting people of color's health. And it looks at Latinos and natives and African Americans, and there are all these little short documentaries around it. So people will always say to me, tell me what I can do. Like, they'll say, okay, great, Dr. Hollins. Okay, I got it. You're telling me I have bias. What can I do? Well, before I get into what the research tells you what you can do, let me give you a couple of simple things that you can do. One is that you can just start feeling some discomfort and taking risk and leaning into the conversation. Right? When you wait until you feel comfortable, when you wait until you have it all together, you've got all the right answers, you know everything before you lean into the conversation, what's going to happen? Nothing. So people say, what can I do? You can get uncomfortable. Go get comfortable with the discomfort and take risks. Ask questions, learn. I always tell people that developing your cultural competence, really all that is knowing that you are a learner. The very definition of cultural competence is a recognition that we're all learning. But one of the things that research says is that you can just start talking about your stereotypes. Own them. Acknowledge that yes, you too have them. The other thing that they say that you can do is identify where your stereotypes and biases are. They've got a great survey that you can take right in front of your computer. You don't have to share it with anyone else. Take the implicit association test. You can look at your biases around age. You can look at them around race, around sexual orientation, and different identities. Take it. Don't believe me. Go find out for yourself what biases and stereotypes that you have. Thing they found in this study I thought was interesting is that when whites, they found that whites had a kind of pro-white attitude towards their own group, 75%, where only, I can't read this from here, but where only 9% had a pro-black attitude. Blacks had 36% had a pro-white attitude and a 40% pro-black attitude. We know that where you won't have as many stereotypes about your own group as someone from outside the group, but you'll still have stereotypes about your own group. Latinos had a 69% pro-white and a 13% pro-black. Asians, 69% pro-white and 11% pro-black. So this is just one of the things that they looked at from the implicit association test. A lot of times we'll make the assumption because there are diverse people on the committee that those diverse people aren't going to stereotype about me. And the truth of the matter is that I have stereotypes towards Asians. I have stereotypes towards Latinos, towards blacks. So just because of the color of my skin, don't assume that I've done the work to make sure that I don't let those stereotypes get in the way. It's not checking a box to see the number of people of color that we have helping us make decisions. The other thing that you can do is engage in mental perspective taking. This is putting yourself in other people's shoes. This is where we've got to become genuinely curious. The example that I like to give is the Black Lives Matter movement. Right? What if we would have gotten genuinely curious about that? Rather than having a reaction to it, what if we would have responded to it with, so are blacks saying that Latino lives don't matter, or that white lives or Asian or Native lives don't matter? I mean, is that what they're saying? And really get curious. What is the experience of black people in this country that they would have the need to have a Black Lives Matter movement? How might the conversation look differently if we got curious rather than reactionary and said, well, don't all lives matter? It's fascinating to me that, you know, I see everywhere these breast cancer awareness, right? Bumper stickers, pins, marches, you know, all these things. But I never hear anyone say, well, don't all cancers matter? And even if I heard one person say it, I don't see this whole backlash and reaction to the idea that we need to pay attention to this particular cancer for this particular reason. What is it when it comes to race? We get all defensive. What's that about? What would people have to give up in order to explore the experiences of people of color in this country? The other thing that you can do is something called priming. So to help to mitigate your bias is when you're faced with someone, like even when you came into this room, like who did you choose to sit next to? When you're hiring, who do you end up hiring? Are you more likely to choose to ask, do they want to be on a committee with you? Priming is where you ask yourself, does this person remind you of does this person remind you of yourself in some way? And is that a good thing? Right? Like, you know, I kind of love me some Caprice. I'll just let you know this. And if I can find a mini me out there anywhere, you're hired, right? Does it remind you of someone you know? I won't ask if there are any Leslies in the room, but I remember when I was 19, my boyfriend cheated on me with a woman named Leslie. I'm 51 years old. If your name is Leslie, I'm sorry. Does this person remind you of someone that you know, and is that a good or bad thing? See, what they're saying is that you got to get good at asking yourself questions so that you can pay more attention to the behaviors, who you sat next to, who you greet, who you welcome, who you give information to, the silos that you're creating. Are there things about this person that influence your impression, the way they dress, the way they write, the way they speak? I teach at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, as Solynn had said, and every year I teach a multicultural class. There's about 100 students. It's a 4-day course. They have to write a paper, 10 pages each, 100 students. I do have some assistance with it, but I always have my students put their name on the back of the page, because I know that my bias is going to get in the way. But the other way my bias is going to get in the way is that I have a type A personality. I want you to have 1-inch margins, no Times Roman font, please. Double space. Please don't fold the corner of your paper together as if that's a makeshift staple. Number your pages. I've got all these things that are my little quirks. And if I'm reading a student's paper and I'm at the 30th paper times 10 pages each, I'm now irritated with you because your paper is falling apart. You've used some fancy font that I'm not very fond of. How might that influence the way in which I grade your paper? Does it have anything to do with the content of the paper? No. The other thing that they say, and I have to go, is creating counter narratives. Counter narratives are where you know that the message that you know that what the stereotypes are about a particular group, and so you are intentional about creating counter narratives in your mind so that you don't let that reinforce your thinking about a group. A counter narrative I often used to do with my daughter when she was really young was tell her how good she was at math when she worked really hard at it, because I knew as a girl that she would be told and messaged that she didn't need to look, that she needed to look pretty and not be smart, and that if she was smart, she wouldn't be smart in this particular area. I realized at some point that I really had very seldom, if ever, told my daughter that she was beautiful. So I tried to make that up, right? That's what this work does, is you learn something and then you go way over here, and then you're like, well, wait a minute, let me go way over here. My daughter's now 14. She's taller than me. She's a full-bodied young lady, and she wears a size 10 shoe. She's a big girl. And so now my counter message to her always and often is how beautiful she is. Because I know the messages that our society is going to tell her about who she is. And so she needs me telling her just how beautiful she is. That's a counter message. Let me skip to how I was going to close this. And things like don't rush, don't be distracted, be present with people. Last, I'll just share with you a study that showed just take a snack, have a snack. Have a snack. Right? I don't know if you're like this, but I'm one of those hangry people. When I'm hungry, I'm much harsher. There was a study that was done with judges and found that when they were hungry, they gave harsher sentencing. And just saying, if you are in a position to make an important decision and you're hungry, your bias is more likely to get in the way. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you.